Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, welcome. I'm going to ask you to take your seats. So welcome to our author visit with Lisa Hiton, author of Afterfeast. My name is Dylan Zavagno. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at the library, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Lisa Hiton. A couple housekeeping notes before we do. Lisa's going to read from her book for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. We're also going to have Q&A from the Zoom people attending, so I'm going to ask those first, and then we'll open it up to the room. Books will also be available for purchase and signing after the event over on that table. We're also going to ask you to try not to, during the program, walk in front of the camera here so everyone at home on Zoom can see okay. There are other doors to exit from. Lisa Hiton is a poet and filmmaker from Deerfield, Illinois. Her first full-length book of poems, Afterfeast, which we're here to celebrate today, was selected by Mary Jo Bang to win the Dorset Prize at Tupelo Press. It was just published last month. It is a book of fierce lyrics investigating the speaker's place in history against the backdrop of landscapes of Greece and America, a roiling political present and past, including the legacy of the Jewish diaspora and questions of sexual identity. Lisa Hiton holds an MFA in poetry from Boston University and a master's in education in arts and education from Harvard University. She's the author also of the chapbook, Variations on Testimony. And she's a senior poetry editor for the Adroit Journal. She is also the founder and co-director with me of Queer Poem a Day here at the Deerfield Public Library. Thank you. So over the past year, the library and I have been collaborating with Lisa on many programs. So I just wanted to say what many of you already know. Lisa is an especially incisive and generous thinker, a brilliant poet, and a gracious friend. About a year ago, Lisa and I conceived and co-directed Queer Poem a Day, a daily poetry podcast for Pride Month, featuring 30 poems written and read by contemporary LGBTQIA+ identified poets. There are many Poem a Day podcasts out there, but this is the first one specifically focused on the queer community. Lisa never for a moment doubted the reach and impact of our project, and she was right. We got many major poets to participate and press coverage from WBEZ and the PEN America Foundation. You can also, on the Deerfield Public Library podcast, hear my recent 1-hour interview with Lisa all about this new book that's on the Deerfield Public Library podcast feed wherever you listen to podcasts. I am so happy to be doing this program with Lisa again. I think this is the best of what a library can do, connecting you to a hyper-local person like Lisa and to the global ideas that is in our mission statement to provide the community with open access to the world of information and ideas. So please join me in welcoming Lisa Hiton.
Thank you, Dylan. So this morning, I got a text from my brother who lives in Denver, and he said, "Are you pumped?" And I said, "To read lesbian, sex, and Jewish diaspora poems in front of my family? Yes, absolutely." So I figure on that note, I'll start with one of the more seductive poems, I think, and I believe the oldest poem written in the book. Tuesday. You wear a yellow bathing suit. You leave the butter melting on the stove, sizzling in the kitchen. We are standing somewhere between door and sunlight. You take the burrs out of my skin. They're made of ice. You say, "Are you all right?" I look at your hand. All the things that sting me in your palm, then on the floor. The little holes in my arm still burn. Shh, shh, you say, and touch my arm, your breasts in the bathing suit, the butter burning in the pan. So this is uncommon for first books. I didn't know this till I put the book together, but I kind of am a long poem poet. Other poets ride on the sonnet or the 14 line, and for some reason, this book is organized by 4 very long poems. I'm going to read at least 2 of them today. This one has an epigraph from one of my favorite books, and I think the best book of queer poetry written in my time, Crush by Richard Siken. The epigraph is the trees and the space between the trees swimming in gold. So this is the space between trees. 1, go into the garden and pick the tomatoes. They're ripe as a dream. Imagine me naked, making a dinner, goat cheese, arugula, fresh strawberries staining formica. Imagine being threatened by something so awkward and timid. I am not naked, I am not brave. The world is never mentioned. When we are young, we are inside our narratives, climbing trees because we cannot fly, picking apples from our father's shoulders, catching fireflies in our hands. Open your hands now, fireflies leaving you, gasping for air. We hold on to things because we think proximity to the world makes us part of it. Call me from the garden, I want to make sense of it. 2, call me from the river, I want to make sense of it. The clipped phrases, the muttering of words. There's a party going on in the background. I cut the lemons off center. Marrakesh, pigweed in the gardens of Thasos. The bartender, the book I gave you with the broken spine. The word was never mentioned. Stand closer to me, taste the sauce. I'm making it for you. For years, the entomologist studies the species he loves. Only what if he's not an entomologist? What if he's you? And what you find is too familiar, so you cut it into pieces. Farewell body, farewell village, farewell window with the amaranth flourishing in the morning frost. I'll dig a tunnel for you where we can live secretly away from the light. If the tunnel floods during August storms, cicadas will crawl up over us and die in the sun. I want to say the word out loud, but I have no voice. Where is the shovel? Where is the hammer? 4, we built a garden, but we forgot to build ourselves a cathedral. Light beams in as certain colors. I want to make a mythology out of the image in the window. You picking tomatoes. It always rains on the lover before she dies. 2 figures moving to opposite sides of a map. Look closer. The map is a garden. The figures begin as pawns, are revived as queens. Now, the moment when it's no one's move. That's what the poem is, the space between trees, the landscape of distance, which is a longing, which is a hunger, which is what makes us lines on a page, reaching from one trunk to the other. But there is no telling between the 2. Only air, only light, only the absence of flesh. 5, your heart is so small and delicate. Your heart beams like citrus. Here are the pores opening. Here are lovers ripening in a purple sky, the space where there is nothing between. Face me, leap into it. The lines blur like watery lenses. We are not mythology, neither are we love. There, I said it. Now close your eyes. Leave me standing in the kitchen, water flooding in from the storm. Wanting to be extraordinary, we made ritual out of our tiny lives. I'll tighten the screw top on the bottle of balsamic. I'll leave the knives in the drawer. 6, there is a myth about love, and I read it over and over. Every night you dispel it by putting other bodies between us. How does this end? Do I wash up on a shore covered in green glass? It was supposed to be harmless. The smell of vanilla and thyme in the crook of your neck, where skin meets hair, your harpoon jaw, how we are afraid of the same thing. 7, it won't be your body I miss when I'm alone. Gunmetal winds against the French windows. I left the mollusk shells on the sill in the kitchen. In South Carolina, you gutted them and listened inside. It was beautiful to you the way opera is to your mother, a language you cannot translate, but that you feel more deeply than your own. Thank you. You do not have to clap after everyone. Dylan, which mic is for Zoom?
The black one.
Okay. I'm gonna neglect the room mic because I think I can fill the space better. I'm gonna be, Susan Gorman's here, so she taught me how to put on a lapel mic. I'm gonna do this. Okay, here we go. Much better. So, one of the things about a first book, at least for my generation, is a lot of us had this beautiful opportunity to go do an MFA program. And I did mine at Boston University, and one of the big poets there, big name poets there, Robert Pinsky, one day we had this amazing conversation related to my poems about the difference between what is voluntary and what is involuntary. And so a lot of my poems, especially at that time, take up the dream state. And to that end, there are poems which imagine my father's Shiva, which is always fun when my dad's in the room to read. So I will read one of those today. And actually, I didn't know this till the book was published. This is called Dream of My Father's Shiva, Lake Michigan, 1963. The year changed multiple times for all reasons that were aesthetic and not based in anything. And when the book came out, my dad actually told me he used to be horrified when he would drive through Belmont Harbor because there were these ballistic missiles that were there when he was a young boy around the time of 1963. So it, I think, suits all of those things about what is voluntary and what is involuntary in a dream state and in an artistic space. Dream of My Father's Shiva, Lake Michigan, 1963. I pull a body out of the lake and it's my size. You are completely dry. I drag you across the beach by the right arm and right leg. I bring you to the Shiva house. It's easy because you grip my hand. I don't have to do all the work. Your other hand is missing fingers. I trawl you back to the lake to find them. Your freckles enumerate and cluster, constellations, little myths I flick off your skin like sand. The sand dissolves into snow, which turns to ice. I slide with you, ice skating children playing on a snow day. Faces of the family around the Shiva table, seasons later, years later, waiting for us to return from this desert of ice. The hours, they come as an urn to put you in. You do not fit anywhere else. The mind, the house, the vase. I am not prepared for the change. When the grip tightens and then slacks, it's winter, it's summer. This book's title, Afterfeast, is a word that comes from a Greek Orthodox tradition after the Pentecost. They have multiple feasts, and one of them is called the Afterfeast. I spent 3 summers with my mentor, Carolyn Forche, in Thessaloniki and on the island of Thasos. And one day I came down and they were having the Afterfeast. So the staff kindly asked the Americans to kind of go off and find dinner elsewhere. And I kept doing all this research, and it's June. And I'm like, this is so Jewish looking. It looks like Seder, but summertime. It turns out it's Shavuot. It's actually Shavuot. It's just, they changed the word because they don't do Hebrew anymore. I don't know. So Shavuot was also my bat mitzvah. So this is a feast about the Feast of Weeks, and none of that is in the poem. This is a poem that takes on some of those rituals that you do when you're on an island, especially a mystic one, and it blends them together and makes its own after feast out of them. And you can hear me talk more, I'm realizing now, to Dylan about this poem on our podcast together. After feast. There is a deep sea fish with 2 stones in its head. If you only find 1 stone, you've killed the fish too soon. You'll be doomed to 7 years of bad sex. When you eat the fish, if you find both stones, run them under cold water with the lemons. At night, make a fire at the sea's edge. The stone you throw in the fire will kill the thing it represents. The stone you throw in the water is the thing you'll seek all your life. What the stones stand for has to do with the fish you ate. In one case, the stones stand for 2 horribly obvious things. love between women and Judaism. You can't know which stone is which. You can only know by the fate that comes after. Because you're a bad gambler, you won't sleep tonight. If you shatter them, it will be up to the wind. Throw both in the fire, you'll be a hollow corpse. Throw both in the water, you'll live forever like this. The day dawns, the bread rises. You were so beautiful. Why couldn't you be brave? Huh? Oh, thank you. Are you all hearing me okay in the room? Great. Okay. This is another poem that takes place on the island. It's called Mies on a Beam. This is a physics phenomenon, so similar to fractals where the same shape repeats itself within itself. In the Midwest, this is we have an easy marker for this. The Land O'Lakes butter has a woman on the box holding a Land O'Lakes butter. And if you look in her Land O'Lakes butter, there she is again, and there she is again to infinity. Good in that way, but I said the one, I don't know. I didn't know that actually. Is that recent? Well done. I will not use that analogy then. I got to find another one in culture. Anyway, so in this poem, the shapes mimic each other and you can see them within each other everywhere is the idea. Mies on a beam. While the others clustered in the inkwell of shade made by a beach umbrella, we walked to the edge of the peninsula, just past the marble quarry. The vast white slabs burned in the midday heat, burned at our feet. The crevices and indentations that had just cradled tatters of waves, now dried and densely filled with salt, ancient salt, scouring our calluses. At the edge, I immersed myself in the blue. Because the sky was cloudless, I couldn't be sure which element drenched my skin, unbearable organ. The water, then the slab, immersion, then pain. Immersion, pain, and what had I desired, and what had I seen? No stone in my periphery, no ships in the timeless clarity before me, the blue spilling into itself and back, and a voice speaking. It began as hers, calling out to Alexander, to his treasure in the centuries hallowed drumlin below us. Then it morphed and hid in the shade, the same shape and color as the shade of the umbrella, made by the creature shaped like an umbrella. Its hood, hollow, is that the head or the heart of the thing, and therefore made of shade, structured to cradle that dark mystery, voice, blotting itself, until it dissolved as everything else into the invisible crease of blue, only to return to me as myself without a body. Immersion, then pain. On the hot slab of history, I survived, and the creature below me collected its things in the shade of it. Who's here? This poem is about a lot of things. This next poem is a longer work. It is about how on your way from America to Greece, you have to go through Germany to get there. I was lucky enough that my very dear friend and colleague, Richie Hoffman, took me to his family's place of leaving from Europe, which is a medieval town called Speyer, just outside of Frankfurt. So we were walking around this medieval town, which has a very specific Jewish history, having these inverted feelings and visions and ideas about Germany, selfhood, sexuality, gender, where he's German American, I'm Jewish, where he's male, I'm female. All of those things come into play and are the lens through which you enter Greece in this poem. Dislocated cities. In the synagogue ruins, we stand on opposite sides of a rock window, natural as 11th century figures, still acquainted with each other, as though no history had happened through the rock lung. You do not hear my sigh. Exhale when you inhale and think, yes, Miriam, my skin matted out by the sun, dusty pearl, matching the ruins we look through to each other. A sign says verboten. Because it is the language of your ancestors, you obey. This is not the language of my ancestors, though there are Jews who came from here. We have never been lovers. After the beer garden, after the river drowning itself in the river, after the long stroll through the Rhine alley, music in the vast cathedral, air from the crypt below rising, centuries old like the groundwater below the synagogue ruins just across the plaza. Judengasse abandoned. The cathedral where we are among a listening crowd. Pain on the edges of my body, though bodies do not have edges, but are abstract and rounded. The helix of music is the helix of genetics, exhausting me, but waking you up. It is so cold here. I cannot cry for how numb I am down to the breast. We will never be lovers. On the stone path leading to our pension, a gravestone, Hebrew carved in by German peasants. They mimicked the shapes, but could not read the names being written. Another stone left unturned. I cannot turn over. Another story where the protagonist disappears without a sound. Twin beds in our room bumped next to each other. I am cold and sleep right away. In the morning, you are awake, pacing. The news in German, the Rhine still spilling into itself. Where everywhere else I dream, hear nothing. For breakfast, coffee, sausages, a soft-boiled egg. We'll find the bakeries your family ran before there was a war to feel close to. You walk ahead of me into the Grand Cathedral. With my kino eye, I recognize everyone looks like you, medieval and contemporary at once. We stop for tea in the boulevard leading up to an imperial clock. Across the way, 3 street musicians, clarinet, accordion, tambourine, the tune I know from the Hebrew, at once medieval and contemporary, at once a peasantry, next to the croon of the regal country. It was the summer of Wagner in the country of your ancestors. You stand before the buildings that were once run by your family. You ask me to take your photograph. When I shoot through the glass column, the lens flare, the light so bright I see black and white, like the photos you've brought from the century before, which you folded and put in your notebook, boyish thing that you are. If we are far, the war is far. If I am close to you, I am close to the war. I am in the one country where I have no affairs, where I do not feel love. When I had no love, I excused anxiety from the table and sent her to her room in the attic where she made no ruckus. But when I slept alone in the city of medieval air, I could hear beneath the ice sheets the low murmur of her slow typing. You can't get to Salonika without passing through. In the last city Reuben lived in Europe, I feel present instead of historic. People look like him, like my mother, olive skin and coarse hair. I ask where the right stones are. I look for plaques to read. I pace in and out of the hours. The plaza where they burn the bodies like banned books. The museum tucked in the maze of Salonika. Hide my face when I weep, sitting on the marble bench. You would hide me. You would hide me. You would hide me if we were in a different time. No one in my family survived the Holocaust. Everyone in my family survived the Holocaust, though none is a Holocaust survivor. Where were you when the winds changed, when you knew he would never be Greek or Turk because he was something else, without a nationality, but with a race threaded thin as fishing line, all over Europe and heading west? Was it in the Schwitz house next to the Greek Orthodox Church? Was it in a letter from the state, a glance from his blacksmith, a season of lemons that stayed green, a lightning storm on the coast of the city where so many bolts hit at once, I had to believe in Poseidon? Was this town Greek or Turkish when he left? Was he a Turkish boy? Were there poplars to swing from in the yard? Greco, Turkish, Judeo, Spanish, Yiddish, Hebrew, English, hide, below deck, barrels of olive oil until you get to port. Hide your face, speak in Greek. When they offer ouzo, ask for 1 ice cube. When they offer yogurt in the morning and they've already brought ham and bread, say Efkaristo. You can't leave Salonika without passing through. You can't go back to America without passing through. I taught a course this summer that I designed called Little Daggers. I'm very interested in poetry that is conniving and that pummels the person experience the art. I hope this is one of those poems that sings and hurts at the same time. The title also, I didn't note this in the book, and maybe I should have. I've been thinking about it lately. The title is Mahler's Ninth. This is actually a poem about the first time I made mussels in my kitchen. I was trying to impress my mentor, Louise Glick, at the time, because I knew that was one of the things she liked to imbibe in. So it's a poem about making mussels, but it's called Mahler's Ninth. And part of why is because Jeff Berger-White, my mentor who's over here, had given me an essay by Lewis Thomas called Late Night Thoughts, listening to Mahler's Ninth Symphony. And that little essay, I think, actually, it was like an inception to writing this poem in a way that I didn't understand until I saw it in print, and how listening to that, it's hard to undo some of the themes once you know what they are. Mahler's Ninth. Gone the pile of shut black mouths bold in cold water. Gone the time and tang of shallot as the garlic burns in the oil. They whir when strained. Shh, let them think we're already gone. Does a thing remember its ocean? Brine like ragged cement. Oh, what thrill their lives were before the ice bath, before the plastic bag. In goes the white wine, and the fog that rises from them makes them drowsy. Why did I bring something alive into this kitchen? In the wake of what suffering am I to offer or perform myself? What was happening in there, in those blooming mouths? So I peeked inside through the steam, obsessed with death, but having no desire to die. I'll just read 2 more. This little poem is, I think the most recent of the poems that I wrote in this book. And it is the second, I'll read the second to last poem and then the last poem. And I think the title, more than I meant when I wrote it as an individual leaf, where it is in the book, it mimics exactly what the title does. The Border. At night, I watch you walk to the grotto. What is said by the grotto that you have not heard from me? What failure sorrow is when it departs with the sea. I listen for the wind to become dark, for the water's return. But that is not the voice speaking to you, the waves finding your feet. You're unknown and young, you've never been pregnant. The sound you hear is not the grotto itself. It is vowless, promising nothing. Yet every night I watch you walk to it, below the grove, the olives reeking in the late heat. All right. This is the last poem in the book. And I will just say that it has an epigraph in Greek. And the epigraph is by the famous Greek poet Yannis Ritsos. It comes from 18 Songs of the Bitter Homeland. And this song is called The Long Wait. And the epigraph translates to, so in the waiting, our nights have lengthened until the song has taken root like a tree. And those in prison, O mother, and those far away in exile, they let out a sigh, and a poplar springs into leaf. The title also is a little bit talking to Passover. The dwelling place, or scoring the death of the firstborn. Sorry, one more thing. This poem uses the word thyme a lot, and it's usually spelled like the herb that you use to cook, but there are a few times it is not. Okay. The dwelling place, or scoring the death of the firstborn. Did you notice the thyme blooming? We'll walk again with a dooming in our feet, the thunder, thunder of soul on stone until our bones carry us back to the sea. Oh, we will not call it the sea. I have seen the night of the full moon lighting the surface of an intimate body. Our bones will carry us to the sea, and oh, we'll say, oh, let us reach below our feet and gather the stones, the wants we vault into the air. The stones that are round and smooth, the stones that mean nothing as bones mean nothing, except when offered to the well, where tonight we have been exiled. Darling, let us run there, fledglings that we are, let us curse and curse and curse at the time bursting open all over the streets. For the chickens, for the tea, for the roasts and hosts of honeybees. Do you trust this song as a gift upon a bow? You must sing aloud what you feel is so. I lied to the Nazis, I've lied to the police, I've crossed myself and crossed the streets. I sang hallelujah, I sang it into the dark night which opened its gate. Darling, darling, it said, I give you a new fate. Time all over the landscape, time by the fields, time by the roads, olives and olives, toads and toads. The crickets have bandsaws for legs, yet cut nothing down. But you, said the night, can be a man about town. Gather the sprigs, gather them like hearts, sell them in the market, sell them for their parts. They call me the knife, lover like a young tree, and in prison they made me an amputee, a Boylston street runner from that vast country. Darling, they're replacing limbs with dollar bills. They're checking us into asylums they call hotels. Sometimes the rooms play Wagner on a loop in 4/4 time, the clef blurring the chef who forgets the rind, and the bodies of dead fascists. So boil the water, rub the meat with salt. Stalin is dead and it's all our fault. Shove an apple in his mouth when you get him off the spit. 5 sprigs for each limb will do the trick. I was the firstborn. I saw the streets before they were streets. I knew darkness as itself. It was like being rigged to a ship in mourning robes. On the Bowery, young people flit in and out of clubs. They lick each other and dream. They do not ask questions. Do they ask for the time? Do they know how it grows? How it smells and feels and means nothing until you put it on the stove with the sourdough. I didn't ask for this body. Darling, you have not been intimate or honest. The concrete below us and the concrete above us are silent and rough. The metal, like the ship's bluff. Who will mourn these dreams? The one about the moon, where time stands still in the face of gravity, where chicken in the wood oven falls clean off the bone, where the young who gyrate are made of flesh that has never been violated. And who will massage the herbs into the meat? And who will throw the stones in the well? I want to return as a phoenix, but Jews don't get cremated. How can I rise from this sleep, a heap of bones in a coffin? If there is a tombstone, will you visit often? After a while, you'll ask for the time. In the grocery store, in the car, in the door left ajar, by the child who did not want to be naked, no, but oh, I have just been in the sea, which is to say born. This is not skin for you to scorn. You'll ask what happened in the name of the ghosts. My grandmother has been in prison for 10 years and exile before that. The screeching bats in the summer fly low. It is time to go. It is time to go. Thank you.
Have a Q&A now. I do have one question from the Zoom here, and I will say this was sent in just before you started reading that poem.
Okay.
But it was asking, is there a reason you don't use rhyming in your poems? So maybe you could just talk.
Yeah, I can talk about the problem.
And can you repeat the question so that you hear it?
Sure. Why don't I use rhyming in my poems? I think I do use rhyme in my poems. I think the work that I've written since is reinvestigating certain elements of form in a way where I think a lot more rhyme is going to come. I think rhyme is useful most when the flamboyance of its music either counters the anxiety of the speaker or mimics it. My friend Richie Hoffman, who I brought up, who's very formal, his first book is unbelievably formal, and he uses rhyme in a way, he can outrhyme me all day. I think there's a way that the performance of voice is something that really has to be dictated by the speaker or the content. So it's not that I'm avoiding it, I just don't always think it's merited. And sometimes you hear whatever the musical lick is, and that generates the poem. I think a lot of poets who are more formal are inspired by linguistic elements. I tend to be inspired by something that has more to do with like a gravitas of feeling. So it's not for not trying. I just think a lot of times if the rhyme generates the poem, when I go to revise it, the prompt, whatever prompted the poem goes away, sometimes the prompt has to leave too. I'm not sure if that was a useful answer, given that I just read a very rhymey poem, but.
We don't seem to have any other questions on Zoom right now, so.
Okay. All right, I saw Adam first, then we'll go over here next.
The poem Tuesday.
Yes.
What's the structure?
What is yeah, great. The question is how does the structure in the poem Tuesday work? I'll hold it up for the screen too. It's one of the rare poems where things are floating. The on the nose answer is that it mimics butter melting in a pan, which was not my intention when I wrote it. It's just like, as a critic looking at it, that's like the first thing I would say. I'll also say this is one of the 3 little errors that I found so far, but suit should be to the left and there should be space between suit and butter. It really bugs me. I think part of what happened when I wrote this poem a very long time ago. It was my first time sort of thinking about much smaller phrases of language. And it's more of like an intuitive, energetic format to do floating lines. And there are poets who exclusively write in lines that float with minimal to no punctuation. And this poem, I think, did that because the butter was moving. It's some magic between the butter and my mind happened that I wasn't paying attention to when I wrote it, but that I look at it now and I say it's butter. And the idea of melting. There's a question over here. Yes.
My question was that last poem feels like a total departure from your voice throughout. And is that, so you had mentioned that the last 2 were new? Is that last poem also new?
No.
Oh, it's not.
Well, new to you, Sophie, but it's not the newest one.
So I guess I wanted you to tell me more just about, was the process in writing that poem different because the voice just feels so different? The content is similar.
Yes. I think I love that the content is similar. Like especially today, like I haven't read Mahler's 9th in a while and I'm like, oh, here I am throwing thyme and wine into a pan again. Pretty much I just like to cook and eat food. I think it's a great question, Sophie. I'm sorry, the question is, the last poem feels like a vocal departure in many ways, some of it relating to the rhyme, not more to the form than to the content. That poem is very hard for me not to feel the shadow of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock in a lot of ways. I think the way that the rhyming works is very related to just having Eliot stuck in my ear. I think also part of it is the vertigo of Greece. When you're walking around these islands, everything is so hyper intensified. And this poem actually came from, I'm driving in the car on Thasos. My mentor, Carolyn Forche, is a very important poet to many and to me. And her husband, who's a war photographer, but also drove a cab for forever, is just, at the age of nearly 70, whipping us on these switchbacks in like this little go-kart. And I'm like holding on for dear life. And all of a sudden we get to this like opening to the water and there's like a drop off. And Carolyn, without missing a beat and not hearing herself, says, "Did you notice the thyme blooming?" And so to me, this poem was like, I heard it and like, it just had to come out as music because I heard her say something casually that was unbelievably musical, and like modernism was dealing with like time and space in this other way. So that's a anecdotal answer. I think also that poem, and Sophie was in my MFA program, is an unbelievable poet, thinker, writer, and human. And you have seen a little bit more work that I wrote last April that's more invested in that way of thinking and singing than I think this book was when I wrote it. Dylan.
We do have another Zoom question.
Great.
Someone's asking, did you find yourself revising many times in your writer to generally stick to your first?
That's such a hard question. I find revision to be unbelievably difficult without some semblance of a workshop setting. Since leaving school, people like Sophie Grimes have been unbelievably helpful in this process, because if I didn't have other readers, it's hard to not sort of let the first draft sit there. I actually said this in an interview recently. Carolyn Forche once in workshop talked about you have to revise while the clay is still wet. The second it's dry, you can't touch it anymore. So part of my effort, I think, is to, once I have a poem that I know I'm going to keep reworking it, at least for a while. And I think when I put the book together, some of the things that were hard is that I wrote this, so many of these poems were written between like 2010 and 2014. It's so long ago. It's very hard to go back to some of them and see, not errors, but just see like things that make me cringe, like that I've moved on from in some way as like a writer or a thinker. But I just had to accept that the clay was already dry. Fine. My father's going to ask a question. Brace yourselves. Yes, go ahead, Dad.
What's the signature poem of the book?
What's the signature poem of the book? I don't know. I think that would be a better question to ask the populace who's read it. I think for me, to me, the achievement in the book is Mizana being on the hot slab of history. I survived, and the creature below me collected its things in the shade of it. That I can't believe I wrote. So to me, that's like one of the things in the book that I think made it a book. I don't think it was a book before. I was sending it out before I wrote it. And then I worked with Jory a second time at Harvard, and something happened and I thought, now I have the book. So I don't know if anyone else, I think I was at a reading with graduate students. They're like, read The Senator. Like there's other poems that I think people find memorable, but right now, that's the closest poem to me. Any other questions?
The common theme of food in your writing.
There's a question about the common theme of food in writing. I think because I cook a lot, and cooking is so freeing to me, like unlike baking. If something's going wrong, you add more butter usually, right? Like, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to continue to make something until you've made something. I also think food is unbelievably ethnographic in ways that I didn't understand till I got older. So the poem Dislocated Cities, where I'm wondering like to what extent is my great-grandfather Turkish or Greek? And I'm hearing people talk about Sephardic Jews with a different word than they use for a Greek Jew. And I'm remembering my mom and her cousins who have this joke, which I will say over and over again, but like Grandpa Reuben always said, or they always say that Grandpa Reuben always said, right, there's a difference. Like the hash he smoked was Turkish, the food he ate was Greek. The way my family on that side eats is so distinctly different than most other Jews who I grew up around. The use of oregano, the use of lemon, the lack of matzo ball and the stuffed zucchinis, like those are things that are such sense memories that especially because I traveled to Europe so much writing this book, I think that's part of why food became a massive part of telling some element of my ethnographic story. I think it's also just so good to eat really good food. So I just think about it and cook a lot, maybe. Yes. Dylan.
We have one more Zoom question here. How has the pandemic affected your writing?
Oh my gosh. Sophie, I'm so glad you're here. During the pandemic in April is like poetry writing month. You're supposed to write a poem a day, which is awful for poets. It's terrible. Having a writing routine to me is like not a poetical way to be in the world. Habits are for fiction writers because they have way more pages to write. Poets need to go, stay up late, drink a bunch of whiskey, jump in the Aegean naked, and then wait 4 years, and maybe they'll hear a line of poetry, okay? So the pandemic ruined any possibility of being able to go do things that would eventually lead to a poem. But because everybody else was like, oh, I'll learn how to bake sourdough and like do what, and like, I'm gonna work out luckily some of my MFA cohort was like, why don't we actually write together again? Because we all need to write together again. So I hadn't written in a very long time, like at least 2 years in a real way, poetry anyways. And having this group sending a poem a day every day, I feel like another book is coming. So I think also I've been thinking a lot about house musicians that I love and DJs and the music that is suddenly coming out in the last like 6 months. I'm like, oh, everybody was hunkered down, at least at that beginning part, and really using whatever that pain, privacy, and silence of that time was to generate wildly new things. I cannot wait to see art across all genres for the next like however long it takes for a publisher to take. It's another thing, but no hands, any hands. Thanks.
Well,
Okay.
let's all get to roll.
Oh, yes.
When did you know that you want to be a poet?
Oh, man. Okay, when did I know I wanted to be a poet? Well, there's the funnier, more pragmatic story, which is that I'm at Boston University. I love the College of Communications. I've never held a camera, but I'm determined because Susan Gordman raised me in the Black Box Theater. I'm kind of like, I am supposed to be a film major. So my parents were like, why don't you try advertising? Just one class, please try advertising. Like you'll have a job, like it'll be great. So I went to film school. I tried one advertising class, aced it and said, don't care, still going to film school. And during film school, where I imagine my parents being like, oh my God, please be able to get a job. I actually remember calling you, Dad, about this one. I got into Maggie Dietz's poetry workshop, but it conflicted with a film class and I was going to take it anyway. And I think his panic of like, wait, you're going to be a poet now? Like filmmaker was bad, but like poet now? Oof, what does this mean? What is that? So I don't know. I don't really feel like it was a decision. I think Maggie Dietz really kind of put the talons in and was like, now you should go to do this writing workshop at Skidmore. And part of it was I just found people who were living and talking and experiencing the elements in a way that I had not met before that time, like right around graduating. I still don't know that I think of myself per se as like I don't know. I think the projects dictate themselves. I have other things to do that I think might be more like film or longer forms. I will say as a reader, I felt like I wanted to be a poet when I read Things I Didn't Know I Loved with Jeff Bergerway. So as a reader, that did something to me that was potent and powerful and much more that specific poem made a collective out of people who I thought would be disconnected for forever. And so whatever that element of teaching and writing and learning, whatever happened during that poem is something I just want my whole life. So it's not really being a poet, it's just that je ne sais quoi of my two mentors over here from the Black Box Theater and the courtyard, where I read Leon Lee's poem aloud. Like it's just all memory. Somebody said that they heard this in a workshop recently. I don't know what writer, like famous writer said it or wrote it in an interview, that every family has a story, but not every family has a storyteller. And I thought that's what it is. It's not really the poet thing. It's just, I grew up hearing unbelievable oral histories around the Seder table. And something about that meant artist to me. Okay. My book, let's do it. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you mind sharing a little bit with us about the artist?
Oh yes, the art. This gorgeous cover is a painting by a very young Greek painter. She lives in Athens. Her name's Georgia Theologou. And you can see there's like a face being pulled out of the face. It's called How to Disappear Completely. I didn't even know the title when I saw the painting and I thought, that's mine, I have to have it. Yes, all of her work is beautiful. Highly recommend a little Google search. Awesome. All right. Buy the book. I'll sign the book. All of the above. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.